Welcome to UK Reporters. I'm Alpa Patel. From here in the BBC Newsroom, we send out correspondents to bring you the best stories from across the UK. In this week's programme, it's emerged the security service MI5 has been secretly collecting huge amounts of data about British phone calls for the past decade.
It's a power that's been exercised for more than 10 years, pursuant to an Act of Parliament so vague that almost anything could have been done under it.
Dangerous and Dickensian, the damning verdict on Northern Ireland's high-security prison.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth.
Handbags, pearls and shoulder pads, the chance to own a small piece of history as the Iron Lady's wardrobe goes under the hammer.
Just thinking I want to be Lewis Hamilton.
And the ambitious world of go-karting, where hundreds of youngsters aim to follow Lewis Hamilton to Formula One victory. The BBC has learned that MI5 has been collecting British phone records in bulk and in secret for the last decade. The news came as the government announced an overhaul of its surveillance powers. The Home Secretary said a new system would help them search for terrorists, but there are also plans for details of people's internet activity to be kept for the first time. Here's our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera.
For 10 years, MI5 has run a top-secret programme out of its headquarters. Beginning in the wake of the 7/7 attacks, this required companies to hand over in bulk records of all domestic phone calls. Not what was said, but the fact phones had been in contact. This was then used to track terrorist networks and, sources say, save lives. This programme was so secret, I'm told, that few, even in MI5, knew about it, let alone the public.
It's a power that's been exercised for more than 10 years, pursuant to an Act of Parliament so vague that almost anything could have been done under it. So it wasn't illegal in the sense that it was outside the law. It was just that the law was so broad and the information was so slight that nobody knew it was happening. It seems to me that that was anti-democratic.
But today the Home Secretary unveiled a new proposed law.
Mr. Speaker, the legislation we are proposing today is unprecedented.
This is designed to put the powers of MI5 and others on the table.
Today's bill, for the first time, makes clear to the public all the powers spies, police and the state have to access communications. Some of these capabilities are already well known, such as collecting communications data, the who called or emailed who and when, and intercepting the content, finding out what they actually said or wrote. Others, though, are less well known, such as the ability to carry out what's called equipment interference and network exploitation, which means hacking into computers and phones. And then there's the use of so-called bulk data, acquiring vast amounts of information, which can then be searched through for matches or patterns. Today's bill also outlines new safeguards and greater oversight over how the state can do all these things. This includes something critics had called for, a double lock, in which judges as well as ministers have to approve warrants for the most intrusive activity. There is one new power being proposed, the requirement for companies to keep what are called internet connection records for a year. These reveal the websites people have connected to, although not the full details of what they browse online. Police are making the case that this is vital.
More and more of us are using the internet to communicate. If we don't modernise, we're falling behind with technology and we just have more dark areas where we don't know what's happening.
The police may want these powers, but today's bill is just a draft, and it's now up to Parliament to decide where the balance between security and privacy should lie. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Some of Britain's most high-profile figures from the worlds of sport, entertainment, business and the military have joined a campaign to improve mental health services in England. Around 1 in 4 people in England experience a diagnosable mental illness each year. Suicide is the #1 killer of young men, and among young people, hospital admissions for self-harm are rising. The government says it is taking steps to address mental health problems, but as our health editor Hugh Pym reports, the campaign says they're not enough.
3 politicians and 1 TV personality launched today's mental health campaign, but they're representing a bigger group of celebrities from sport, entertainment and business. They've all signed up to a demand for mental health to be given the same priority as our physical well-being.
15% of people who doctors say could benefit from talking therapies, 15% get it. Well, imagine if you had 15% of cancer victims.
It would never be tolerated at all.
The Lib Dem Norman Lamb and Labour's Alistair Campbell both have personal experience of mental health issues. Today, the former Conservative Minister Andrew Mitchell revealed he was treated for depression after his political problems following a row with police in Downing Street.
That experience makes me all the keener to support the excellent work that is going on in tackling mental health and to make sure it's properly available for everyone who needs it.
By then I'm doing my show, but...
Ruby Wax has faced her own challenges. She says society needs to see mental health in a different light.
Some people say they've had cancer and mental illness, and I always ask, which one do you think is worse? Not one person has ever said the cancer. They also discuss the fact that you can see the results of cancer, and of course you get sympathy. With depression, you'll get perk up like you never thought of that.
Campaigners say mental health has lost out financially. In England, overall health spending rose by 5% between 2010 and 2014, but mental health budgets fell by 0.6% over that period. The government says mental health is a priority and spending is now rising.
We've seen the number of people getting talking therapies double. We've introduced for the first time waiting lists for mental health treatments, just as we have for physical health treatments. And it's important we have parity of esteem, which we do in the NHS Constitution, that mental health is given the same parity of esteem as other health issues.
But campaign leaders argue that genuine equality between physical and mental health care has not yet been achieved. And they're calling on the Chancellor in his spending review to demonstrate the government's commitment by making a significant new investment in mental health. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Let's round up some of the week's other news in brief. It provided an eerie backdrop for Halloween at the start of the week. Thick fog disrupted travel across the UK for several days. Around 100 flights were cancelled and many more delayed. Heathrow, Manchester, Leeds, Bradford, Glasgow, Belfast, Southampton and Cardiff were all affected.
What were we learning about?
It's been testing times for 7-year-olds as the government tries to drive up standards in England's primary schools. The Education Secretary Nicky Morgan wants to reduce underachievement by bringing back national tests scrapped more than a decade ago. She said she also wanted to create a new band of elite teachers to help in struggling schools where results are lower than average. A doctor has been found guilty of causing the death of a 6-year-old boy by gross negligence. Jack Adcock, who had Down syndrome, died from complications from a chest infection at Leicester Royal Infirmary in 2011. Dr. Hadiza Bauer-Garba was accused of truly exceptionally bad treatment which led to his death. Inspectors have condemned Northern Ireland's high-security prison as unsafe and unstable, with one describing conditions as Dickensian. A damning report says Maghaberry prison is in a state of crisis, with both prisoners and officers concerned for their safety. Chris Buckler has been to visit the jail, which some are calling Britain's most dangerous.
Maghaberry houses serious offenders and paramilitary prisoners, but it's a jail in crisis. Today's report describes it as a dangerous place for both those being held and the staff walking these wings. A prison where there is the risk of disorder, injury and even loss of life. Many of those who have been inside Maghaberry say that doesn't come as a surprise to them. Neil Nabney was serving time in the jail for riotous assembly when it was inspected this summer, and he says the problems were obvious.
Once I was put in, it was just like you've been abandoned. You know, it's once the doors are closed behind you, anyone else outside doesn't really seem to care. And I think I would actually have sympathy with some of the prison staff. I did see a few attacks on prison staff and they were completely unprovoked.
The last inspection here at Maghaberry said there were problems, but that many of them were being addressed. Today's report makes clear that those efforts have not been successful. And it goes further. It's damning in its criticism. The number of assaults had increased, levels of self-harm had risen, and drugs were more widely available. There was a failure in leadership. The authors of this report said that Charles Dickens could have written about Maghaberry without batting an eyelid.
It was a very dangerous place, and as we say in our report, which is something I say with a great deal of caution, we thought there was an imminent risk of an incident that caused a serious injury or death to prisoners or staff.
The inspectors have announced that they will go back to the jail in January to check that there have been improvements. And they warned that all those responsible for Maghaberry, including politicians and the prison service, should be sweating about their return. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Maghaberry.
She was known as the Iron Lady for her strong will and tough policies, but Margaret Thatcher was less well known for her fashion sense. But now some of her clothes, the handbags, pearls, shoulder pads and other personal items are to be auctioned. 150 lots belonging to the late British Prime Minister, who died 2.5 years ago, will go under the hammer at Christie's next month. Alan Sodhi has the story.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth.
And where there is power, may we bring shoulder pads. Margaret Thatcher's arrival in Downing Street brought not just political and social change, but a new look to British politics. She might have been more at home in the House of Commons than on a catwalk, but she went there in power suits, pearls, and her trademark handbags led some to accuse her of, verbally at least, handbagging opponents.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
Now, hundreds of items of her clothing and accessories are to be auctioned, including those power suits and designer bags. Some of the clothes are instantly recognisable. The pale-coloured aqua scutum raincoat and beige headscarf she wore while pictured driving a tank in Germany, expected to fetch up to £20,000. There's also the black and white checked reversible tweed wrap, worn during a visit to Washington for talks with Ronald Reagan. The Iron Lady's family had wanted the contents of her wardrobe to go on public display at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. But the museum said it exhibited iconic fashion, not clothing merely because it had been worn by a former Prime Minister. Some of her collection will be sold by London auctioneers Christie's. The rest will be auctioned on the internet. The money will go to her children and grandchildren, and in true free market style, the clothes and accessories to the highest bidders. Alan Sodhi, BBC News.
Finally, the 3-time world champion Lewis Hamilton is one of Formula One's greatest ever drivers. But what does it take to follow in his footsteps? His training certainly started early on. Aged 8 at a go-kart track in Hertfordshire, he was a member of the Rye House Club, where there are plenty of young drivers who want to be just as successful as their idol. James Burridge went to meet them.
It's 9 a.m. at Rye House in the middle of half-term, and the pit lane is bustling, full of fathers and sons preparing their karts for the grid.
When you go down the straight, you just get the adrenaline rush that nothing else gives you.
I do it just for fun. I've been doing this since I was about 16 years old.
I started a couple of months ago, and I was just thinking I want to be Lewis Hamilton.
This is the track where aged 8 Lewis Hamilton cut his teeth. But the numbers of modern-day Lewis Hamilton is actually on the decline. The costs of go-karting has never been so high. Racing for fun is one thing. Racing to be like Lewis, quite another. Talent here only gets you so far. The best needs sponsorship.
It all depends whether their sponsors can take them to that level. Obviously, with the recession and stuff that we did have, I think it's made people very wary of what they spend and how they spend it.
How much do you reckon it would cost to get your son to get anywhere close to being an F1 driver?
100,000, 200,000. I've been speaking to the fellow who's helping us here today, and he knows someone who last year spent 150,000, and they didn't make it. They're there or thereabouts, but £150,000 a year is an awful lot of money.
One man who knows what it takes is Kevin O'Malley.
He and his son used to race against Lewis and Father Anthony 20 years ago. Now he's a director here.
We get people here now starting at 5-year-old, whereas when he started it was 8. And so we are seeing that growth, and I'm hoping that's going to grow and get better. And but of course it is an expensive sport, so when the parents start, they have this ambition, and then when the money starts running out, it can be different.
How many times has a father come up to you and said, or a mum and said, do you know what, my kid's the next Lewis Hamilton?
We see it all the time, and it's nice to nurture it. The difference between being talented and getting there is when the opportunities arise, you grab them with both hands and take them forward, and that's what Lewis did.
Karting then, the cutthroat business where money talks as loud as the engines. But as the Hamiltons have shown, true talent can find its own way. James Burridge, BBC News at Rye House.
That's all from UK Reporters. Join us again at the same time next week. From me, Alpa Patel, and the team here in London, goodbye for now.